It's good to begin with a bit of a little lightness because it's decidedly a very heavy topic that we're bringing tonight. I thought that we would, and first of all, before I even begin, I just say it's an honor to be with you, Lee, and so to welcome you warmly to the 92nd Street Y. I know it's your first time here, and we're really, really honored that you're with us tonight.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be with you.
I wanted to begin with a poem from a recently released anthology of poems called Shiva. I think there are many meanings to that, of course, and we'll talk about that and how you begin your book. But Shiva here, of course, is the number 7, and it's alluding to the day, of course, 10/7, and also to the sense that we are in Shiva, that we're in a mourning period. And this poem by Lital Kaplan. הנחיות פיקוד העורף החדשות לשיחות חולין. מה נשמע? בוטל ובמקומו נשאל. What's up? Cancelled. Instead use מה נשמת? מה נשבר? מה נשאר? What's shaken up? What's beaten up? What's blown up? מה קורה נאסר ובמקומו נתהה מה קורס? מה נקבר? What's going on? Banned. Alternatives. What's breaking down? What's forever gone? במקום מה שלומך החצוף, נגדיר פנים מול חברינו ונשאל, מה מלחמתך? Instead of the rude, how are you, we must frown in the face of our friend and ask, how were you? ובמקום התשובה השגורה בשגרה, עליה הוטל ויתו חמור שבחמורים. אצלי הכל בסדר, יש להשיב הכל בסדק. והמקפידים בדברי אמת יענו, הכל בשבר, הכל בשבר. And instead of the standard response, forbidden by strict veto power, I'm fine, in fact, it is required to say, everything is cracked, and the truthful ones will answer, everything is shattered. Everything is shattered. The title of the poem in English is Homefront Commands New Regulations for Small Talk. So we begin with a poem about Hakol B'Shever, everything is broken. And from that horrific day, 10/7, Shiva, you, whom some people here know and many don't, and whom I first came to know through this book, you decided that in the shattering you were going to write a book. What led you, what drew you to these stories and the need to write this book?
I started writing in the end of October when I was very much still overwhelmed with the grief, with anger, with sorrow. And I felt like I needed to do something for these victims. And the only thing I could do was what I always did, which is to write. I've been a journalist for Haaretz now for almost a decade, and I was always writing human stories and focusing on the people on the margins of Israeli society. If it's asylum seekers, if it's the LGBT community, people that are suffering sexual violence. And time and again, I've seen how these politicians are not just shaping the policies that are affecting these people's lives, but also retelling and mistelling their stories. And I came to understand that when we really want to understand a political reality, we need to tell it from the bottom up, to hear the real story from the real people. And if you think about what happened since October 8th, it's very similar. We've been flooded with information and disinformation and misinformation about Israel and Palestine, but we hear it all the time from the people in power, from the same people who led both Israelis and Palestinians into this conflict. And we don't hear so much the real people who suffered from it. So this book is my attempt to reclaim the story of 10/7 from the people who created it and return it to the people who suffered it, to go beyond the cold statistics and political agendas and give the readers a ground-level view from the hearts and the homes of the regular people who were caught in the crossfire.
So yeah, sure. So your project was a project of reclamation, of appropriating or reappropriating stories that potentially once out in the world lose the depth and the humanity and the human face of it. It becomes a statistic. And in the review today, for those who don't know, like there was a beautiful review today of the book in the foreword, and the reviewer spoke about numbers and how numbers have almost an ontological reality. They become being, they become something, 1812, or whatever it is, 10-7, 9-11. But you also recognize that numbers both represent but also obscure. They both represent something bigger and also become a stand-in, an abstraction instead of something very real.
Right.
And it's one of the things that I know reading the book, and I want to hear from you some of the stories that touched you, but I couldn't help feel when I was reading the book exactly this agenda that you had, as it were. Like you immediately brought 3-4 dimensionality into each of these stories that were just, for me and for many I'm sure who will read the book, we know some of these, events, but we don't know the characters, we don't know the color. So can you tell us which of the stories that touched you and yeah, maybe that, some of the stories that touched you.
I think you got me exactly right, because what I try to do is to write a book about life, not a book about death. I wanted to get to know these people not just for their last moments, but for their beliefs, for their communities, for their families' histories, going back 2 and 3 generations to when the conflict started, so you can really understand how past wars, how failed peace attempts, how all of that shaped these people's life much before 10/7. And there's 100 stories that are as diverse as the Israeli society is. Maybe I'll start with reading something from the first story in the book. It's a story from the city of Sderot. It's a small city near the border. 11 people gathered in the 3-by-3 square meter room of 2-month-old baby Isha Yazugi on Ahavat Israel Street in Sderot that Saturday. His father, Inon, age 22. His mother, Hillel, same age. Inon's parents and siblings. Also present were the 3-year-old Leah Suissa and 6-year-old Romy Suissa. The members of the Azugi family knew almost nothing about the 2 young Suissa daughters. They did not know where the girls lived or who their parents were, or even how they came to be left near a police station covered with blood. The girls were quiet. The family was afraid to ask. At 6:30 that morning, Inon had made a 3-block walk to the synagogue, as usual for him on a Shabbat morning. But he'd return home shortly afterward with 2 little girls in tow. Home was a modest 3rd-floor apartment of an older building, filled with the smells of holiday cooking from the night before. Happy holidays to sweet Romy and Leah, who are celebrating Simchat Torah with us, Inon called out as he opened the door, trying to explain the unusual situation through the intonation of his voice. The girls timidly entered the apartment's narrow, white-walled vestibule, Leah's mouth hanging open. Romy was crying, her feet covered in blood. Inon couldn't even explain to his family who was the stranger driving a black car who stopped just next to him, shouted, "I'm a Jew," shoved the 2 girls into his hands and gave an order, "Run."
Wow.
That's a story of 4 families. Some of them are Jews, some of them are Arabs. They're strangers, they don't know each other. And on this morning of 10/7, in a few seconds, their life become connected, and all of them are doing everything they can to save the Suissa daughters and Suissa parents. So this is a story that really combines different communities, but maybe we'll speak about a specific one that is one of the most overlooked stories of 10/7, and that's the story of the Ukrainian refugees. Not a lot of people know that, but there are 50,000 Ukrainian refugees who fled Putin's rockets and came to Israel after February of 2022 just to find themselves escaping again from Hamas rockets on October 2023. And I'm following this story of Eitan, which is a 15-year-old boy that was an orphan living in Odessa. And he's fleeing with other kids on the very first day of February 24. He's fleeing to this abandoned hotel in Romania and is making a long journey after he comes to Israel. And he's living in this, in Ashdod, a southern city where the beach, the white beach, reminds him of Odessa, and go to a new school and start a new life. When on 10/7, a Hamas rocket hit directly his home, and he needs to start his life again on the third time in 2 years. And maybe I'll give another example of Moshe Riedler. Moshe was a Holocaust survivor, and we start his chapter in the holiday of Simchat Torah in the year 1941. When the Romanian allies of the Nazis are coming to his home and deporting him to the ghetto with the rest of his family and the rest of the Jews that are living in this town in the border of Romania and Ukraine. And Moshe somehow survives the Holocaust, and as a young man is really driven, is making aliyah to Israel when Israel is founded, and is really driven by this passion of justice. So he takes a job as a police officer, and he becomes a little famous, this kind of police officer you would read about in the local newspapers of Tel Aviv in the 60s, and he's the one arresting all the pimps and the drug dealers, and makes this beautiful career. And when he retires, he moves to this little kibbutz, Kibbutz Cholit, with his daughter Pnina that he named after his mother Pearl that was murdered in the ghetto. And then, on the same day of Simchat Torah, that was 10/7, 82 years to the day, Hamas terrorists murder Moshe in his bed in his home. So that's a story that gives us really the full perspective of the last century in the life of one man that was murdered at the age of 94.
Well, I feel as though when I read the book, I read it twice, I felt each time that here I want to go back to something that I said we would discuss and then go forward. Is it okay?
Of course.
That you write very beautifully in the beginning of the book that since the 7th of October, we've, as a people, been in Shiva. It's very powerful. I quoted it as soon as I received the book. And the sense that we're, as a people, still mourning. And one of the things you do, of course, in a mourner's home is you tell stories about the person. Right? You don't just tell the story about the last year of their life or the last weeks of their life. You tell a story about who they were, at various stages of their life. And I felt that in writing these stories and bringing more depth to each of these people in a way that newspapers or shows can't in any way, shape, or form fully convey, that you were helping us mourn. You were helping us sit Shiva for these people. And someone like Moshe or Eitan, you said in the book that the beaches of Ashdod were nothing like, he said, the beaches in Odessa, and he was jealous that he had left Odessa behind in that way, and to follow the tragedy and the complexity. What was it like for you to listen to these stories? What kind of, first of all, how did you choose the stories? I mean, you chose 100, were there 1,000, and you had to choose from amongst 1,000, 5,000 stories? Of course there were. How did you choose the stories? Yeah.
You're right. It was very difficult to choose. I had three principles that guided me. One was to represent the diversity, the amazing diversity in the Israeli society. The second one was to speak about these underprivileged communities, because not a lot of people know that, but so many of the towns that fell victim to Hamas were among Israel poorest. The cities that are still home to great populations of Mizrahim, of Jews that escaped Arab countries after Israel was founded, 1 million Jews, and are living difficult lives, struggling. So I wanted to represent them. And maybe the most important principle was not to tell individual stories, but to tell stories that are connected to one another. So in every interview I did with a family, I asked them also about the relationship their loved one had with other victims and the relationships they have with other victims. And I just led one story to lead me to the next one. So you kind of, this kind of web of connections was the backbone of my book, and I feel it's a more honest way to tell the story of 10/7, because it's not just different families and individuals that are mourning, like you said. It's communities that were destroyed. Be'eri, they lost 10% of the population. It's people that are mourning their husband or their mother, but also their friend and their teacher, and everyone is connected. And in this way, Israel is like this. It's like this extended family that all the countries is sitting Shiva right now.
What was it like to hear the stories? Were there any stories that you heard and that, completely, broke you? I mean, all of them are. I mean, that's. I'm not asking for sensationalist, but like I know that reading the way that you write, and you're a beautiful writer, you really are. And I felt at one point, I turned to my wife when I was reading one of the stories, and I said, I want to ask people the kinds of questions that Lee asks people, because the kinds of information that you glean, the questions and how they brought you into different places. And I'm sure that there were things that people said that only you could have heard, maybe that they only told you. Do you remember any moments or any stories in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very different plan to how to write this book than what truly happened. Because in the beginning, I was trying to keep these professional boundaries, as you always try to keep as a journalist between, okay, this is my professional job, this is my personal life. But from the very beginning of 10/7, I mean, on that morning, I discovered that 20 terrorists entered the little town of Ofakim, where my family live, and
where you were here?
I was here that morning, and I'm getting messages that where my uncle and aunt are living, terrorists are shooting in the streets. And it's like this one of these poor towns where, even though they suffer rockets from Gaza for almost 20 years, they don't have shelters in their homes. The residents doesn't have shelters because they can't afford it. So every time there are rockets, the people are running outside to the public shelter. So that morning, 10/7 started like, people thought it was just rockets, like it usually is. So people were running to the streets, and they just became easy targets for Hamas to shoot them. And for 2 days, I didn't know what will happen to my family. And in the end, they were saved only because they were lazy, because they're so used.
They didn't want to run to
this rocket alarms that they just stayed home and said, well, more rockets from Gaza. We have it for 20 years. It's okay. So this is how they were saved. And 2 months later, on the 7th of December, I was in the middle of an interview with Eliana Soisa, the grandmother of Romy and Leah, speaking about the loss of her child and how it is to raise their daughters, when I got the call that one of my dearest friends from childhood died in Gaza. His name is Gal Eisenkot, and he was in a mission to rescue hostages when he was killed. And from this
And
moment...
you dedicated the book to him.
And I dedicated the book to him, a man of peace that never came back from war. And from this moment of Gal's death, I was among the people I was writing about. I was on the other side of grief. So some days it was extremely painful and difficult to hear all of these stories and to try to write these lives, these characters of people who just died and carry all of this grief. But I have to say it also gave me strength. Writing this book gave me a mission, and I think it saved me from depression because I could be the voice of these people that were silenced and could no longer speak for themselves. So it was also a good thing for me in the very, very difficult time.
Having something to do, having a mesima, having a goal, having some kind of... I want to talk about memorialization and like it's so important for you to appropriate these stories and to bring out the humanity. And there is always the danger, of course, that in commemoration or any kind of state created memorialization, right? That might honor them and it might not. Are you concerned? And when I think about you as trying to extract memory in a way and being someone who's concerned with how we frame a past experience for future generations, how do you think about how we might commemorate or hold October 7th going forward?
I think that what we're doing this evening, people here spending their time and effort to come and hear about these stories, this is the most important commemoration we can have. And I think what we're doing here in this book is part of a very old tradition of Iskor books.
Yeah.
Of these Jewish communities that since the Middle Ages are collecting the names and stories of the Jews murdered in pogroms and reading them aloud every year in the synagogue to remember. So I think we're following this tradition. And in Israel, to be honest with you, what I hear from so many of these families, that to honor their loved ones and to honor them, the best commemoration will be to go to elections.
Before we move there, I want to move back. As a rabbi, with the elections coming in and high holiday sermons, I'm trying my best to stay with the human face of this for a moment. But I was profoundly moved and broken, frankly, by the way that you started the Nova chapter. I don't know if it would be okay for you to read that or something. I don't know. It's very intense, but it's very raw, and there was something. The whole October 7th, surrealism in Israel is real. Like Israel is surreal, and surreality becomes reality in ways that are, that the frames move so quickly. It's hard to keep up. Are we on the beach, or are we, where are we at any given moment? And that chapter, the way you began with that conversation from the phone call to the rabbi.
Maybe we can describe it.
We describe it. It's a little bit too heavy. Yeah.
It's a painful part to read. But yeah, we're starting the story of the chapter of the Nova that is following the stories of 20 different victims and going back to their families and their lives. We're going back and forth from one story to another. And I started with the story of Haim Mazgin. And Haim is running the special units of Zaka, of the burial organization. And he's doing his holiday Shabbat. He's a religious man, an Orthodox man, hosting his in-laws, 20 people in his home in Petach Tikva, busy with the holiday. But because of his job, he keeps his phone open on Shabbat. And he gets this call from a rabbi he met only once or twice. And this man is telling him, hey, Haim, I'm here in this party. Maybe you heard something in the news. And they kept me to guard something like 200 bodies, I think, maybe 250. And people are fighting here, and I don't know what to do. Can you tell me how much time it takes to a corpse to rot? And Haim is telling him, what do you mean, 200? Open the camera. So the rabbi is opening it and just start to show him this awful scene of all of these bodies. And Haim, and there's a lot of the horrible scenes of what happened to young women there in the Nova Festival of sexual attacks with the murder that we shouldn't forget. And Haim just drives there right away. He finds like 70 volunteers in a moment when Hamas is still shooting. Some of them are bringing trucks that are supposed to take bread, but are taking the bodies, and the IDF is telling them, well, you have until 4 a.m. to take all the bodies, because we're afraid that when the morning comes, maybe they'll try to take hostage some of the bodies. So it starts like this. It's a very difficult scene that I tried not to put as many scenes as this one in the book, to not make it too hard for people to read, because I know it's very difficult, but it's one of these things that we have to remember. We have the obligation to just tell the story the way it was.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I can't even imagine what it was like to take those kinds of interviews. All other difficult interviews that you have in the book, and that you've had conversations with hostages that were in captivity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was interviewing some of the hostages that came back in the deal in November, people that were only 2 months in captivity. And I'm focusing the story of a mother, a daughter, and a friend of the daughter that on October 6th were doing this kind of pajama party that ended up lasting 2 months in Gaza. The mother is Raya Rotem, 50 years old, like this strong single mother, that by an amazing coincidence that I only discovered recently, her grandfather was also a hostage in Gaza by the Egyptian army in 48 and was released in a deal in 49, and they never spoke about it. But
wow.
Her daughter, Hila, is like this 12-year-old energetic kid, and she's kidnapped with Emily Hunt, that maybe some of you heard about, this beautiful, blonde, 8-year-old girl.
Thomas Hunt's daughter.
The daughter of Tom, who was this volunteer that fell in love in Israel and stayed. And
they thought Emily had died when it was right.
And what we discover in this chapter is it wasn't only Emily. They actually thought that Hila and Emily were both dead. But Thomas spoke about it, and the Rotem family just wanted to mourn alone, so they didn't announce it publicly. But in the same time that the girls are held in these tunnels in Gaza and are so worried about, I heard so much after from Tom about how Emily, and from the people that were with Emily, how much she was concerned about whether or not he's alive. They didn't know anything about their families, while their families thought they were dead. So they just give you this, small details that I can't stop thinking about, like the morning they take them from their homes with the pajamas. It's a 15-minute drive from being in your home to being hostage. 15 minutes, and they don't know where they are. They're in Gaza, and the first thing the terrorists do is to cover them up with clothes head to toe, because they tell them men shouldn't see any flesh of a woman to these girls. And they move them for 3 nights between home of different families, dressing them up in these hijabs. And then they end up in this tiny room with Noah Argamani, that the Israeli military is just released and returned to Israel, and Itai Svirsky that was unfortunately murdered in Gaza. And they are the 5 of them. They have no bedding, there's a broken window, and they have fleas, and they have lice, and they try to hide the itching from the terrorists. And all the food they have is a pita for a day, or an orange to split, or 2 cucumbers, something like that. And the terrorists keep taking the girls alone to another room. The mother is waiting for them, afraid. Sometimes they just sit in front of the girls for an hour, putting their gun up, and just ask the girls to look them in the eyes. Or sometimes they would tell the girls, repeat after me, and tell them to repeat sentences in Arabic they couldn't understand. And after that, they told them, well, you're converted to Islam. And the girls would cry because they don't understand. And, I'm just thinking about, this was 2 months, and they came back, and about the people that are there for 12, almost 1 year. We knew we were all broken with this news about the murder of Hirsch and the 5 other hostages, but we don't know what's happening. Maybe as we speak, there are more hostages that are being executed, that are in these dark tunnels with no air, with no ability to stand, didn't see the sun for. So I am really, really concerned not with whether or not Israel can allow itself to make a deal, but about what will happen and what will be left from Israeli identity if we break this sacred Jewish value of Pidyon Shvuim, of bring them back. What will be left from our identity if we don't have a hostage deal?
So for you, the hostage deal, it's hard to move from that story into the policy or to the decision, but for you, you see that as the highest value, and that the feasibility of a hostage deal is, in your opinion, it's absolutely essential that we make the deals.
Israel is a country of mandatory military service. And we have this social contract that you don't leave anyone behind. That's the basic thing that allows parents to give their kids to the army. If we break this, I don't see how Israel can, I don't see the future. More than I'm concerned about Hamas and about Hezbollah, I'm concerned about this shattering of all the values we grew up in and really believed in.
Can I just ask, just moving off of the hostage deal, again, it's obviously very, very, very contentious conversation and contentious at this moment in Israel and also abroad. But I want to ask you, do you think that we in the West and in the Western media have sufficiently documented these stories for those who would otherwise not know the complexity of Israeli society, the depth of the barbarism, the plight of the families, just the horror of the day? I think, I wonder, I don't know, what do you think as a journalist and someone who knows this space? Do you think that?
Yeah, I think the media was filtered through political agendas, and these filters are obscuring the real suffering, the real human pain underneath. And that was the moment where I understood that literature is a much better form for this story, because literature allows us to keep people alive in a way, to keep their individuality, their special character in these pages. And I have to say I felt it the most after Gal's death, because I was so angry about the way he became this political symbol, used by different politicians with different agendas, and I couldn't recognize in all of these articles in the media my friend. He was a specific person, a specific human being that was murdered, and I want to remember him as who he was. And that's what I try to do for these victims and their families, not to remember, spoke today about Chanilok in an interview, and that's maybe the most brutal example of the way, people remember her for these horrible images of her half naked in this van with the Hamas people spitting on her, but she was this amazing, happy, generous, kind person that was helping everyone else, that was living, like truly living these lives of parties, not in a shallow way, but believing that she's, like her father said, she's praying while she's dancing. And I wanted to tell her story like that, not for the final moments only.
So it's again, just to underscore how, as a rabbi, I think that's this is a sacred endeavor. It's a sacred practice. You're trying to give depth. You're refusing to reduce somebody to a two-dimensional, symbol or emblem of something else, but really giving them like their humanity in a profound way. So in a way, even the tension between telling the story in all of its horror, and so that we might remember what took place, while simultaneously also knowing that if that's what we're doing all the time without telling the story of the full person, then we failed in some way. Memory has failed. It's become so there's hope in your book, even though the book is detailing maybe the worst day in Israel's history, the worst day in my lifetime as a Jew. There's hope in humanizing. There's hope in telling the full dimensionality of the story. Where do you find hope in both this project for you and for Israel going forward? Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful
Yesh
because
tikva.
I have to be hopeful. But the situation is complicated. It is. I think that for Israelis, it's very difficult to think now about the future. They still have rockets overhead all the time. We're starting a new front with Lebanon right now. People are still waiting for the hostages. They're mourning. So I think it will take a long time to see what will come and to see Israel climb out of this grief. But we can see the effect on the numbers, because if you look at how many Israelis believe in peace, believe in a two-state solution, it was 60% a decade ago. It was 50% a month before 10/7. And now when you check the numbers, it's 25 to 35% of Israelis who still believe in peace. And it's the same, by the way, in the Palestinian side. It was about 58% a decade ago, and now just before 10/7, they made a survey and it was about 28%. And if you think about it, the people that were murdered by Hamas were the leaders of what remained of the peace community. They were people that were donating money to families in Gaza for 20 years. Every month, like for example, Kibbutz Be'eri would take money from the Kibbutz Kupa and give it to families in Gaza. They were driving sick Palestinians to hospitals. They were truly, truly doing everything they can. And when you speak with this, like if you check their voting rate, 94% of them were voting for left or center parties. If the election were about them, Netanyahu wouldn't even be elected to the Knesset. So when you speak with these families and these communities, they tell you, we didn't only lose our loved ones, it's everything we believed in was crushed. And that's the older generation. But when I think about my generation, the younger generation, people don't know it. 50% of the Israelis are 30 years old or younger, which means that all of us were born with the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and the murder of the peace process, the Oslo process with Rabin. I never lived in a time where there were hope for peace. My first memories are the Intifada, are buses exploding. This is the people that are now fighting. We grew up like that. We were told for the 22 decades that Netanyahu is in power that this is a conflict that we can't solve. We can only manage it. And the technology, that the Iron Dome, that all of that is gonna protect us and bolster the economy, and that Israel can go like that. And I think that we see now hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets protesting for this hostage deal. And I think what they're saying is, we don't agree that we need to always choose the military approach because we see the hostages dying with this. We want diplomacy. We want a deal and a solution. And I hope we can remember that the two peace agreements we have with Egypt and with Jordan from 79 and 94 lasted. And they're the only thing that really bring us peace, bring us safety. So my hope is that our generation, like Rabin came to the Oslo Accords as a soldier. You know, in his famous speech, he said, "I come to you today from the country where parents bury their children, and I say as a soldier, no more. No more blood, no more tears." And I hope that the generation that is fighting this war will come and end what Rabin started.
So we're gonna actually open up for some questions in a minute, but I just want to ask you. We had here at the Y, we actually had an amazing group called the Parent Circle here with us last week. Parent Circle is an organization that brings together parents and relatives of those who have died in the conflict, both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And Vivian Silver's son, Yonatan, was one of the people. He's featured in your book, and he was one of the people on the panel. And he is continuing in a way in his mother's footsteps. His mother was a tremendous peace activist and extremely politically active in trying to bring about peace between Palestinians and Israelis. And I left the conversation with him, and I have the same question for you that I had for him. And your book is so humanizing and so beautiful, and it touches me deeply, as did the people who were on the stage last week, learning about a Palestinian woman who tragically lost her 2-year-old child, and learning why brought me to tears. Another Palestinian who also lost his 10-year-old sister brought me to tears. And hearing the stories of the Israelis brought me to tears as well. But I wonder to myself, are there limits to the power that these stories have and the humanizing to bring us to a place of recognition and safety for both peoples? In other words, I find these conversations necessary, but wonder if they're sufficient. And so I wonder what we need to do next, and how we can take these stories and build them into some kind of, translate them into some way forward is a question that I wonder. I'm sure you do too. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I have two answers for you. First of all, I believe a human solution must come before a political solution. And the human solution is empathy. We live in a time where Israelis and Palestinians are blind to each other's pain and grief. We all mourn our own dead, and it's so hard in this time to look at the other side. And I do believe that telling these human stories is the best form to create empathy, to understand from our pain exactly what they've been through, and to try and start to build bridges. Vivian Silver believed in it, that the personal accounts, that the personal relationships has to be the first step. And maybe speaking about Vivian, I want to say something about an aspect that everyone is ignoring, which is the gender aspect of this war. I mean, if you think about it, there is no women in the Israeli cabinet of war. There is no women in leadership roles in the IDF. And of course, there's no women in the leadership of Hamas. Yeah. So in both sides of this conflict, we have men leadership. And when you think about who were the only ones that prevented us, that tried to prevent Israel, it was young women. It was these young soldiers named tatzpitaniot, or spotters, that were given this thankless job of sitting for hours and hours, staring at the desert, at the border, and telling their commanders if they see some suspected activity. And these girls spoke up months and weeks before, and they told their men commanders, something is going on, something is going on. And they were told, girls, you're the eyes, you're not the brain. 16 of them were murdered on 10/7 on the early hours of the morning, and 7 of them were taken hostage. And then you spoke about Vivian, and I'm thinking about the people that tried not only to warn us from this war, but to end the conflict. And they were women. On October 4th, I don't know if Jonathan told you that, but there was this huge, huge peace march of Israeli and Palestinian women that were walking between Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. Thousands of women they signed this mother's call that is saying we as mothers has more that unites us than separates us, and we call our leaders to do everything they can to go back to the negotiation table and prevent the next war. And 3 days later, Vivian is murdered in her home with other activists from this peace organization. So when I think of the future, it really bothers me that no one is speaking about the critical need to have women's voices in leadership roles, both in the Israeli leadership and both in whatever leadership that will come in Gaza and the Palestinian side. I believe in the mother's call.
Yeah. So I have so much. We should have a second conversation because I have a lot that I would say if it were in a different context about that. I think that a lot of what you just said is really food for thought, and very much worth a deep dive on those issues. I do want to leave it open for a couple of brief questions and see if there's something here that needs to be lifted up. Yeah.
Yes, I wonder what the implications are of Netanyahu not apparently wanting to even do a hostage deal.
I think the implications will be extremely dangerous for the Israeli society. I think that we have a lot more to lose if we don't make a hostage deal than we have to lose if we do have one and release these terrorists. So, and I mean, we see the numbers. So many Israelis are feeling this way. He said a few days ago that half of the hostages are probably still alive. And I think we need to do absolutely everything we can to bring them home.
Yes.
Have you been in touch with any of the families that you interviewed since, and have you learned about how they're dealing with the trauma and how the government or the medical establishment is helping them?
Let's repeat the question so for people online as well. So have you been in touch? The question was, have you been in touch with some of the people that you interviewed, and has the establishment and the medical and how they're being supported and coping with the trauma and the mental health trauma and so on. There are many different concomitant, like there are all these different things that Israel's trying to deal with, both the physical and the medical and the mental. So have you been in touch with people that?
I've been in touch with many of these families. Most of them feel very angry and they feel like Israel have abandoned them completely. I mean, a lot of them are waiting for a call from Netanyahu or from some minister, someone to take. I said this election thing before, not to make people laugh, but truly people feel like, where's the responsibility? The citizens of Israel have the signs of slicha. I wrote this book saying slicha to these victims, wanting to do something for them. All of us feel this way. And
Slicha, apologizing. Slicha, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I forgot where I am.
I know. I'm in the field, so I'm always translating. It's like. Yeah.
And they feel like it's a government that is not acknowledging not their responsibility and not the pain. And some of them, like we didn't speak a lot about the Bedouin families, but I got a call from the family of Amar Abu Sabila, which is one of the victims, the man who tried to save the Suisa daughters and was killed while doing so. And they have a lot of kids, his kids in the family, that are living in these Bedouin villages, and they don't have the protection of the Iron Dome because they live in unrecognized villages. And he's calling me and he's saying, can you speak with someone with the government, because there's still rockets and we have all these kids here and we don't want another person to die from our family. So yeah, I found myself texting all of these Knesset members, asking them to bring some kind of a shelter to this Bedouin village because they have no protection. And that's what Israeli journalists have been doing all of this year trying to help these families not to suffer any more grief.
It's just a little coda here, a little parentheses. I think one of the more complex things that American Jews, I'll speak for myself, but I speak for many others, not for everyone obviously, but many others who have confided in me and spoken with me. One of the complexities for us is to be this war, first the pogrom and the terror that took place on October 7th, and then the war and its aftermath occurs on so many levels simultaneously that it's hard to get your footing. On the one hand, it's a terrorist organization that is a avowed enemy, both Hezbollah and Hamas, and act with the barbarity of a pogrom in the Crusaders. Like the stories in your book and the stories that we know, they position Israel's enemies so far off of the spectra of where what we consider Israel's center of gravity is, even if it is not a perfect country on any level whatsoever, and yet simultaneously with the microscope that Israel is under every moment, we can lose sight of we see its warts and all. So your book is unabashedly talking about the ways that Israel is remarkable, the ways in which Israel is unremarkable, the ways that Israel is beautiful and its people, and also some of the ways that we are already familiar. Those who love Israel know, like any other country, it's full of all kinds of problems. And I think that for American Jews, I'll speak for myself, it's really hard to navigate these conversations, especially having them in a fishbowl, where the entire world is looking for us to beat the drum against Netanyahu or to beat the drum against Israel in various moments. And even if we want to, or we do think it's critical, we're seeing how all of our critiques are being weaponized in the West, right, in a very profound way. And so there are parts of us that deeply, want to be publicly critical, and you, as an investigative reporter, and you've been doing this for decades, trying to show how Israel can, being deeply critical of Israel, where its shortcomings with marginalized communities and underprivileged, and then those of us who also live in a world where those things are not obvious, right? The obvious elements of Israel that are unique in that region are not also visible. And so it's kind of, the conversation is a complicated conversation for a lot of American Jews.
I know. I'm Israeli, so
You can be
we have this right. We suffer it, so we have the right.
Will you plan to go back to live in Israel, at some point?
I mean, we're splitting our time.
You go back and forth.
I never moved here, and my latest article for Haaretz was a week or so ago about the people that are leaving. There is a really increasing trend of Israelis, young Israelis, that are just moving to other countries because we don't see a future. And I mean, I see all of my friends are coming now. They're coming here, they're moving to Europe because we are in this stage in life that, we spoke about the young generation. People are saying, okay, we don't have families yet. We love it. It's our home. It's our language. It's everything we know. But we want safety. And it's this very same thing that my grandparents, when they came to Israel in an older age, my grandparents from both sides, they suffered from not finding jobs when they come in their 50s, living in extreme poverty. But they fought because they told my parents, you'll have a better future than us. They did it for me and they did it for my parents. And then thinking about what's happening now, I keep feeling like we're disappointing them. We're disappointing their sacrifice. And that's the second layer that there is here. So I think we need Israel. We need a safe place for Jews, and we'll always need it. And I hope we can save it from the threats we have on the outside and from the threats we have on the inside. But yeah, it's not an easy time.
So for being able to put words to a time that one of the most common phrases I think people use is "ein milim." There are no words. "Ein milim, ein milim, ein milim." You put a lot of beautiful words, milim, together in this remarkable book. It raises a lot of questions in certain ways, but in other ways it just provides a tremendous window and a gateway into the lives of real people, not statistics, not numbers. And I think that I'm hoping that everybody reads this book, Lee. I think that it doesn't matter who you are, right, left, center, wherever your positions are politically, this is not a political book. It's a book about people, and I think it's a great testimonial to their memories. So thank you for this, Yaron. Everybody, Yaron.
Thank you.